Hello and welcome to HBM's Crypto-Corner for Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. We have a few things to talk about, so let's get started. Apparently there's a new Nessie photograph, or a Loch Ness Monster type creature supposedly spotted in London, compared to the classic 1934 surgeon's photograph. Just looks too similar. This was snapped in Wimbledon Lake. Loch Ness Monster spotted in London. This snap shows Nessie-like creature in Wimbledon Lake that looks just like 1934 pic. It seems the Loch Ness Monster might have fancied a change of scenery after a snap appeared to show a Nessie-like creature lurking in a lake in London. The unknown creature was captured roaming the waters in Wimbledon in a photo that looks just like the infamous image taken by Colonel Robert Kenneth Wilson in 1934 that sparked the Nessie craze. Eric Chitros spotted the Loch Ness-like creature lurking in Wimbledon Park Lake. The image bears an uncanny resemblance to the infamous surgeon's photograph snapped in 1934 by Colonel Robert Kenneth Wilson. The extraordinary shot shows a mysterious black outline prowling Wimbledon Park Lake, which some people have speculated could be the legendary beast. The theory has been fueled by it bearing a bizarre likeness to the notorious surgeon's photograph published 88 years ago, which is supposedly the first image to capture Nessie's neck and head. But instead of Surgeon Colonel Wilson being behind the lens, Londoner Eric Chitros took the picture of what he believes is the mythical monster. The construction site manager said he'd been strolling by the picturesque lake one morning when he noticed what appears to be the Loch Ness Monster peeking out of the depths. After sharing the snap online, it caused a stir amongst social media users who were left wide-eyed by the picture allegedly showing the creature down south. One wrote, "My goodness," while another added, "Awesome." But not everyone was convinced Nessie would have made the grueling journey to Wimbledon, traveling almost 600 miles away from her usual stomping ground. One local commented, "That's an escaped elephant. Anyone missing any?" And a second guessed, "Effing wild swimmers." A Scot even chimed in on the debate, saying, "On behalf of all Nessians living in London, I can confirm that we endorse this message." Some suggested Eric, 35, may have actually spotted a cat, an exhaust system, a wheelbarrow, or possibly a bike. Yet one remained convinced the Loch Ness Monster had took a holiday. The surgeon's photograph from 1934 sparked an almighty buzz at the time, but is now believed to have been an elaborate hoax. You never know what's hiding in the unknown. Eric Chitros. It was apparently created using a toy submarine with wood putty attached, fashioned into a head and neck by a group of pranksters. One of the tricksters, Chris Sperling, is said to have revealed the pictures were staged on his deathbed. But Eric has kept a pragmatic stance on the truth behind his recent sighting, telling Penn News, "It's a tree. As soon as I spotted it, I thought of Nessie, and hence I snapped a picture," he added. However, the 35-year-old is still keeping an open mind as to whether an actual Loch Ness Monster exists. "You never know what's hiding in the unknown," Eric said. "If a real Nessie exists, then it's got to be some dinosaur that refused to go extinct. I like to think that it does exist." Nessie theories. Nessie was supposedly spotted a whopping 16 times in 2021. 6 official sightings were from visitors to the Scottish Loch, and the other 10 from webcam watchers around the globe. Boffins previously investigated whether sightings of large, mysterious sea creatures like Loch Ness Monster are actually whale penises. Experts believe that the long neck or tail of mythical creatures, which often appear in photographs, are actually willies sticking out of the water. A study speculated that many accounts of large mysterious sea creatures with a serpent-like tail were actually a large baleen whale and its snake-like penis. They added that other accounts could be attributed to the male members of certain whale species, which can be at least at 1.8 meters long and sometimes spotted rising from the water during mating. Other researchers have suggested Nessie may actually be a giant eel. So, I think this is either a hoax or a misidentification. I don't think it's Nessie that's floating around in that lake. Next, a newly discovered primate. Today's news featured a story which I wasn't expecting at all in 2022. A new species of primate has been identified in the Mekong region. Actually, the new langur was discovered in 2020 when it was newly reported by the BBC, but the news did not make it to the World Wildlife Fund's list of newly discovered species until now, thanks to circumstances of the wider world. Indeed, the endearing Popa langur was not alone. There were 224 newly discovered species on the list, released by the conservation group. The list highlights the need to protect biodiversity in the Mekong region, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, where new species are still being discovered. Farah Beekeeper has previously posted about the Saola and iridescent snake for similar reasons. You should look at those posts since they rhapsodize about the mysterious hinterlands of Indochina, which are home to all sorts of mysterious, compelling creatures. Speaking of new snakes, this year's WWF report also included a bright orange snake that lives on slugs. The new langur species was identified by whiskers which point forward and by broad white circles around its clever eyes. Oh, and by DNA. In fact, the species was originally discovered and collected in the 19th century, but nobody properly identified the bones at Britain's National History Museum as belonging to a new monkey species until now. Unfortunately, this quote-unquote new primate is already in pretty deep trouble, and scientists estimate the total population to be at 200 to 300 individuals, most of whom seem to live near Myanmar's dormant Popa volcano, another worldly location pictured immediately below. Mount Popa also features a fetching monastery. It is easy to wring our hands about the fate of these amazing new rainforest organisms, since they may well disappear forever, right after we have learned they exist. Myanmar in particular is going through a destructive era in the aftermath of the 2021 coup d'etat. Yet the pristine forests of Southeast Asia, along with their ghost monkeys, iridescent snakes, and giant catfish, have lasted this long thanks to their remoteness and to the customs and lifestyles of the people who live there. And the national governments are not universally dedicated to economic extraction over all else. Vietnam in particular is serious about protecting its ecological treasures, like their astonishing giant salt-shell turtles. The rest of us need to find a way to help out. There are wonders in the Mekong jungle, and I never even told you about the new succulent bamboo species. So, a brand new species of primate discovered, quote unquote. Even though it's been around for years, it's just now being recognized. Will this be the case with Sasquatch? Who knows? Or any kind of Sasquatch type creature. Next, watch. Family stumbles upon Bigfoot near lake in Kansas. A peculiar piece of footage circulating online shows a family in Kansas stumbling upon what appears to be Bigfoot near a lake, though not everyone is convinced that the scene is genuine. The odd video was reportedly posted to a Facebook group devoted to a popular state park known as Cheney Lake by an unnamed resident of the area last Saturday evening. Alas, the witness did not provide much in the way of detail as far as what they encountered, choosing instead to simply marvel that he and his kids went for a drive around the lake just now and caught something strange on video. That, of course, is something of an understatement, as the curious creature captured in the video bears a striking resemblance to Sasquatch. In the video, which is shot from the perspective of the driver of the vehicle, the dad explains that he is driving the girls out to check out some stars and get away from the lights. After noticing what they think was a shooting star, they attempt to get to an area where they can get a clearer view of the sky, which is when the headlights of the car illuminate a puzzling shape in the distance. One of the man's daughters is the first to notice the curious interloper, crying out, "Wait, what the heck is that right there?" The family's attention in the camera is then turned towards what appears to be a bipedal creature crouching down and then running away as if it knew it had been spotted. As one might imagine, response to the footage has been largely mixed, with some viewers suggesting that the family encountered Bigfoot at the lake, and they point to what looks like eyeshine emanating from the creature, as well as the little girl's fearful demand that they go home right now upon seeing the potential Sasquatch. Skeptical observers, however, argue that the video is almost too good to be true and seems almost perfectly staged, which suggests it is a fairly well-crafted hoax. Should that be the case, at least we can credit the pranksters for making the fake video a family affair. What's your take on the latest on the puzzling footage? Here's the footage in question.
Driving the girls out to check out some stars, get away from the lights. Hey, there's a shooting star.
Oh, that's a cool. Pretty cool. Yeah, cool.
Maybe I can pull out here and see. Careful, better not drive off in the lake. Lake's low.
Wait, what the heck is that right there?
Where? What the?
What the heck?
What?
Go home. Go home right now.
Now that's the footage. Very interesting, if it is indeed a Sasquatch. Although it could be a hoax, it's really hard to determine one way or the other, to be quite honest. I'm going to call it a undecided, leaning towards hoax. Because it just seems, although the little girl's reaction seemed to be pretty natural, could have been somebody hoaxing them, perhaps. Which is entirely possible. What do you guys think? Finally, Daniel Perez has released his list of the top 10 best Bigfoot books. 13 years later, I again attempt to rank the world's top 10 books on the subject of Bigfoot, aka Sasquatch. In January 2009, I wrote in my newsletter about the 10 best Bigfoot books that were ever published. And of course, it was my viewpoint that was being expressed. That was 13 years ago. Since that time, two things have gained greater traction: self-publishing and the massive website we've all either come to love or hate, Amazon.com. And with that traction has come a deluge of Bigfoot books, some with high levels of scholarship, while others seem to have little or to no continuity whatsoever. Keep in mind, my friend and longtime colleague, the late Rene DeHinden, along with Don Hunter, who penned Sasquatch in 1973, did not make the cut. If I were trying to blow smoke up your tailpipe and keep affection and emotions at the forefront, Sasquatch surely would have been listed. But this is an unemotional survey of what I consider the 10 best books on the subject matter. It is true that some of the discussed books are exceedingly rare and out of print, but if you look hard enough and scour the four corners of the internet long and hard, you are likely to be rewarded. Books are very interesting things. You don't need to put a battery in them to use them. There are no cords needed to keep the writing legible. You can bookmark the volume and get back to it when you are recharged. With a library card, you can literally tap into the thoughts of a Nobel Prize winning scientist by checking out his book. The late scientist Dr. Carl Sagan may have said it best: books break the shackles of time. Across the millennia, the author is speaking clearly and silently inside your head directly to you. It is likely the author has never met you. Number 10, Bigfoot, A Personal Inquiry into a Phenomenon by Kenneth Wiley, 1980. With Bigfoot an unproven species and greatly doubted by the scientific community, it is always nice to have a fresh set of eyes on the topic. Such is the case with Bigfoot, a personal inquiry into a phenomenon by Kenneth Wiley, a PhD in African Studies. Sociologist Ron Westrom, Eastern Michigan University, reviewed this work, and in part he wrote, "There are good books and bad books on Sasquatch. This one holds the distinction of being both. For balance on the Bigfoot subject, I would absolutely recommend reading a book that doesn't align with your belief system. A book that may cause you to ask many questions when you've reached the final page of this 268-page work." Wiley interviews quite a few people in this work, including two of the most legendary researchers, Rene DeHinden and John Green. Curiously, a physical anthropologist who was heavily involved in Bigfooting, Dr. Grover Krantz, is not interviewed. He has a very interesting Appendix B in which he writes about bionomic factors as reported in Bigfoot encounters versus known mammal species. An unknown species may not fit nicely into a bionomic chart, given the very fact that it is unknown. Ron Westrom's view of Wiley's Bigfoot isn't necessarily devastating, but certainly worthy of notation. A slight air of snobbish superiority pervades the book, yet I found it difficult to escape the feeling that a hard central core is missing, noted Westrom. Perhaps this is ultimately due to the author's belief that there cannot be a Bigfoot, and to my own that there probably is. Number 9, Sasquatch Apparitions by Barbara Wasson, 1979. Barbara Wasson's Sasquatch Apparitions get brave reviews in my view, as she is one of the first to assess the credibility of Bigfoot eyewitnesses, and Wasson has the educational background to make that assessment. The late Oregon researcher had the courage to jump into a male-dominated activity, and later had the gumption to write about some of the major investigators from that time period, such as Rene DeHinden. It was reported they were romantic, and she gives him glowing coverage, and John Green. In the past, rarely was the investigator or researcher discussed Centerpoint, but all that changed with Wasson's self-published book consisting of 173 pages. On the very famous John Green, she writes, "You conclude Sasquatch is an ape. How do you establish this? Of course, not everyone found Wasson's book a breath of fresh air. Marine biologist F.G. Wood pounced. This book tells more about its author, a clinical psychologist, than it does about Sasquatch investigations. Whether it will persuade some of Wasson's fellow investigators of the error of their ways, whether it will upgrade criteria in investigation, and whether it will get the public's attention, all seem doubtful." Don Herron, writing in Fate magazine, turned the tables on Wasson with his review. "If John Green fails as an investigator because he is unaware of psychological techniques, then Wasson, as far as I'm concerned, fails in this written investigation because she is not a reporter. She is the only woman to make my top 10 listing." And of course it says, see the article titled "The 10 Best Bigfoot Books." Number 8, The Historical Bigfoot, 2nd edition by Chad Arment, 2019. The Historical Bigfoot, 2nd edition by Chad Arment is the second largest Bigfoot book by page count, this one weighing in a hefty 1,080 pages. This work replaces his earlier work of the same title that was released in 2006 with a mere 346 page count. For the skeptics and doubters who pretend that Bigfoot is a modern-day invention that started in 1958 in Northern California, it is hard to understand why there are so many wildman reports from all over North America that predate the 1958 date by more than 100 years. According to the author, different terms were used before Bigfoot became the all-encompassing term to describe the phenomenon at hand. Terms like wildman, gorilla, yahoo, boogeyman, and what is it seem to be acceptable names for something observers knew little about. Although Chad Arment notes that several of the pre-1958 reports describe hoaxes and misidentifications, there are others, such as an Oregon report from 1900 that describes an animal with cat-like agility and tremendous speed, with the appearance of a man and a height of 9 feet. When the tracks were measured, his feet were found to be 18 inches in length with 5 well-formed toes. Never once do you get the impression that such a report describes a bear. The compilation of a book of this nature is of vast importance as it lays out the case, in newspaper article after article, about the long history of Bigfoot-like animals in North America prior to 1958. Number 7, Raincoat Sasquatch by J. Robert Alley, 2003. J. Robert Alley's Raincoat Sasquatch is one of my favorite books, as it is very clear the author has spent an extraordinary amount of time on this exceptional book, with the focus being coastal British Columbia and Alaska. The report of a sighting by a Ketchikan taxidermist in October 1992 makes spellbinding reading. I turned the rifle scope power up to 9, filling the scope with the creature's backside. I could see it was a female. The face was flat and dark-skinned. She had a broad nose with flared nostrils. She got up. She didn't use her hands, stated the witness. He goes on. I could see she had a huge abdomen. She looked pregnant. I thought of squeezing the trigger a good number of times. The author's level of exhaustive documentation, organization, regional coverage, and source notes is highly commendable. Robert Alley is calm and cool in discussion. The growing public awareness that there is something there will encourage further sharing of new information and material evidence. There is a fine chronological summary of reports in one appendix, and the only real drawback to this fine book are the maps, which are too busy and cluttered. Number 6, Bigfoot, the Indian Sasquatch and Myth and Reality by Dr. John Russell Napier, 1972. What is interesting about the late Dr. John Russell Napier is that he was involved with the first Bigfoot documentary produced by the BBC in England, and the centerpiece of his discussion is largely focused on the Patterson-Gimlin film, in which he vacillates between the footage being real and faked. It was only a few years later, in 1972, his Bigfoot, the Indian Sasquatch and Myth and Reality would be published. With unquestionable qualifications as one of the world's leading primatologists, Dr. Napier ventured into the goblin universe by going against the tide and writing scientifically in this work. Said the distinguished scientist, I am convinced that the Sasquatch exists. Kenneth Wiley, a skeptical writer on the subject, added, Napier's book is indeed detailed, brilliant, crammed with significant zoological, anthropological, and literary material. He is devastatingly critical of some of the more notorious Bigfoot stories so often reprinted uncritically. The English-born scientist was one of the few from academia to take the subject with robust seriousness. Dennis Chitty from the Department of Zoology at the University of British Columbia opined in Science about Napier's work. The author's fence-sitting is unlikely to satisfy the extremists, but in a twilight zone of fact and fiction, who cares about scientific realism? The author has obviously had a wonderful time on his excursion into the art of the insoluble. Number 5, North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch, by Dr. John A. Bindernagel, 1998. North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch by Dr. John A. Bindernagel, a self-published book with 270 pages, is a very detailed look at the behavior of Sasquatch or Bigfoot. In his introduction, the author writes about his intended goals for his readership. His first is to let his audience know about what has been reported about Sasquatch appearance, sign, food habits, and behavior. Furthermore, as Dr. Bindernagel writes, I wish to draw attention to patterns evident in these reports and to a remarkable consistency in physical features and behavior. And lastly, he matches patterns of appearance and behavior described from the great apes of Africa and Asia to that of its North American cousin Bigfoot. The wildlife biologist concludes that the Sasquatch is very real wildlife Species. A music fan posted an Amazon review of this work. Any scientist whose curiosity isn't aroused by this read isn't thinking like a scientist. In 2018, Dr. Bindernagel passed away at the age of 76 from cancer. Number 4, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science by Dr. Jeff Meldrum, 2006. Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science by Dr. Jeff Meldrum is an exceptional book, as the author has tremendous background not just in his discipline of anatomy and anthropology, but also in the field of Bigfooting. His writing in this 297-page book is in-depth, careful, scientific, and straightforward. Dr. Meldrum is perhaps the most scientifically educated on the subject, having learned from the works of the late Dr. Grover Krantz and others. Dr. Meldrum is not just an armchair scientist, he is one of the most active participants in the field, having checked out stories from first-hand sources in his travels, and lectures to date have been rather extensive. His treatment of the Patterson-Gimlin film is brilliant. To my knowledge, this is the first Bigfoot book that ushers in the terminology mid-tarsal break. His use of never-before-seen photos are eye-opening. His book, long overdue, is a welcome extension to where other scientists have left off, notably Drs. Napier and Krantz. Dr. George Schaller his science is not submerged by opinion and dogmatic assumption. He disentangles fact from anecdote. As well written as this volume is, there are some murky and contentious areas such as the Memorial Day footage, the Paul Freeman video, and the Skookum body casting, all of which the author gives top billing. Number 3, The Sasquatch and Other Unknown Hominoids by Dr. Vladimir Markotic in 1984. If you judge a book by its cover, the plain yellow cover of The Sasquatch and Other Unknown Hominoids would have fared poorly. This now out-of-print work, rare and badly advertised gem of 335 pages, was edited by the late Dr. Vladimir Markotic, with whom I had the privilege of meeting once in June 1989. Although this work is a compilation of several authors, including Grover Krantz, John Green, Dmitry Bayanov, and Carlton Kuhn, and others contributors have poured considerable amount of time and thought into their writing with extensive amount of reference material. There is a technical but very readable paper, Analysis of the Patterson-Gimlin Film, Why We Find It Authentic, with the late René Dahinden being one of the authors. Dahinden's Russian co-authors found the film to be legitimate. The Harvard-schooled Dr. Markotic, who died in 1994, spelled things out in his introduction. It is not of cardinal importance if such things exist or not, because even if they do not exist, they are part of folklore all around the world and therefore provide legitimate reason for study and examination. Lauren Coleman added, it is one of these undiscovered bests that people should read. Those undiscovered bests. Number 2, Sasquatch, the Apes Among Us by John Green, 1978. John Green's Sasquatch, the Apes Among Us is a top choice for myself and scores of readers who follow the subject. By 1968, the lanky Canadian had already authored a treasure on the track of the Sasquatch with a lot of original pictures and text. 2 more booklets would follow. With the publication of his 492-page opus in 1978, the Columbia University school journalist made it crystal clear that Sasquatch was much more than a mere legend. In order to write this important contribution, the late John Green, along with Dennis Gates, toured the United States looking for sighting and footprint reports firsthand. In a June 1976 communication, Green would write, I told a number of you that I would write and tell how Dennis and I made out on our trip, and I had been a long time getting at it, but we had accumulated so much information in such a short time that it is still not entirely sorted out. With no internet in place, the former newspaperman went directly to the source. His book speaks for itself and is simply loaded with significant information, from statistical analysis to citing reports from around the country that were largely forgotten and ignored. Green would make a crucial connection with Bigfoot and water in his 20 Inches of Rain chapter, which only makes sense if there is a biological animal behind it. If the matter were only folklore, it is likely the connection to water would be absent. Charles A. Reed, an anthropologist, reviewed Green's book and in part stated, "This is one of the most important books you could expect to find. There is much new material and new thoughts by Green on the problems of Sasquatch and the hunt for them. For what it does, it is the most thorough book to date." Finally, at number 1, Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life by Ivan T. Sanderson, 1961. My number 1 pick, for a multitude of reasons, would be the late Ivan Sanderson's Abominable Snowman, Legend Come to Life. It was one of the first books to be published in this genre, and outside of Odette Tierney, who also released a Snowman book, I can think of only a few other Bigfoot books that preceded these works. Since the publication of this work, Sanderson has been repeatedly vilified by his most ardent critics. Imagine for a moment writing a 500-plus page book without the aid of a word processor around 1961. You toil away on your manuscript with a manual typewriter. Well, Ivan T. Sanderson did just that, and he did it well, both in scholarship, writing style, appendices, maps, and a voluminous bibliography in this opus. His cloth-bound classic retailed for $7.50 back in the day, and with the subject of Bigfoot going more mainstream with every passing day, Sanderson's Snowman usually fetches big bucks on auction sites. Sanderson's mammoth book established the global nature of reports of Bigfoot and Yeti-like creatures and other unexpected hairy bipeds. He may have been one of the first to use the term cryptozoological on page 148 of his book. Not all reviews from that time period were gushing. H.R. Hayes, writing in the Saturday Review for October 21, 1961, said, "The author's tendency to rail repeatedly against the closed-minded zoologists becomes an irritating mannerism. His style is so determinately popular that it falls halfway between that of an editor of a science fiction magazine and that of a chatty columnist in a village newspaper." Regardless of the harsh critique, the late Ivan T. makes the grade with his standard reference work that set the bar very high early on. So there you go, Daniel Perez's list of the top 10 Bigfoot books. Will there be any changes if he releases another list in about 10 years or so? Who knows? And that's going to do it for this week. I want to thank you very much for tuning in. You guys are the heart of the show. I always say that, but I always mean it. And I'll continue to do this as long as you guys want me to. And hey, until next week, y'all be good or be good at it. This is HBM's Crypto Corner.